Hello, and welcome to the gift of psychosynthesis. We are here today, my colleague and friend Jamie Caro and I, with our guest, Claudia Businaro. And we are very excited to have Claudia in the podcast. And I'm going to introduce Claudia for us, for who don't know her. Claudia Businaro is a UKCP accredited psychotherapist. She works in a private practice in London and in Wiltshire. Did I pronounce that right?
That's right.
Claudia is a trainer, a supervisor, and a study tutor at the Psychosynthesis and Education Trust in London. And she teaches a module on transpersonal psychotherapy to a master's students in Warwick University. Claudia also studied group therapy at Gestalt Institute in London and trained as a supervisor. She has taught CBT and group facilitation in an addiction counseling course accredited by Bath University, and she has worked as a family therapist and clinical supervisor for a residential addiction center in England. She also studied cognitive analytic therapy at Guy's Hospital, where she worked as an honorary therapist for several years and has recently completed a pranayama teaching degree training with Dr. Kutuşu
Kaustub. Jessica Char.
Okay. Claudia has been interested in spirituality for over 20 years. And before doing an MA in psychosynthesis psychotherapy, she studied Western philosophy in Rome University, La Sapienza, and completed an MA in Indian religions at School of Oriental and African Studies, the SOAS, in London. She studied Sanskrit and yoga philosophy in India and Nepal, and she is currently working on a doctorate on the therapeutic use of breathwork at Warwick University. Wow. Oh, yeah, amazing.
I feel so old now.
No, that's amazing. Thank you for being here. What a bio, what a CV. We are very honored to have you here, Claudia.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you. There are many topics we would love to talk about. I particularly am very interested in the Sanskrit, the yoga philosophy, because I'm a qualified yoga teacher as well, and I've been practicing yoga for many years. But we will try to keep it a bit more narrow, keep it to a few topics today. But let's see how it goes. And I would like to ask you, Claudia, to start with. We are both trainees, late-stage trainees at the Institute of Psychosynthesis. And one of the questions I'm asked a lot is, why therapy? What does therapy do to you? And why could or should someone choose therapy instead of, or as well as, a particular spiritual path or other ways of healing?
I'm not particularly kind of rigid in thinking that therapy is the answer to all. So I think that therapy has replaced a lot of other support that we had in the past. One, for example, was going to confession. Nobody does it any longer in the West. Also, we inherit some of the traits of maybe medicine, men or women, shamans, individuals in communities that were of more guiding roles that, since we don't have communities any longer. So I don't think that is the only way, but of course it's a very effective way in terms of guiding and supporting individuals that are finding life difficult in some ways, but also that are curious about existential issues, philosophical issues, life in general, relationships. And part of the reason why therapy is effective is because of what we know now is mirror neurons. So it's a very basic way of regulating the nervous system with the presence of another that actually is very well known in spiritual paths. Sitting at the feet of the master only often in itself is re-regulating. I don't know if you have ever had the experience of sitting in the presence of someone that has a spiritual depth, what you would call spiritual teacher. I don't know if that's a bit of an abused word, but I remember when I first met one of mine that I went there with a very dysregulated mind, overthinking and with the 2 billion questions. And when I sat literally at his presence, my mind, that kind of dysregulated mind disappeared, and I sat in peace of being. So I'm not comparing therapists to that level, but somehow, hopefully, through personal work, personal therapy, group work, study, the therapist might have the capacity also to have a being, a presence that in itself can be self-regulating, together with tools, the tools of knowledge, of psychosynthesis, working with personalities, and so on, that helps the individual to extend and expand what in neuroscience you would call the window of tolerance. So there's a basic. But again, there are many ways in which therapy can be helpful. One of which I think is also the existential challenge that we all face. So yes, but I think there is a beautiful story of Jung that was working with a Jewish client, and after a few sessions, he realized that therapy for her was totally unhelpful, and he sent her back to the Jewish community and the synagogue. That was her therapy.
It's so interesting what you're saying, because I have had some experiences like that, being around people who are very well regulated energetically. And I've also been wired up to an EEG machine at certain times in my life when I've been near these people, and you see that you're actually absorbing that energy from them, and you're synchronizing with their energy. And very often they're exhibiting, as you're probably well aware, like these sort of alpha theta type waves. And you are just being brought into the same pattern as them. And yes, what you were saying, it could be like a master or someone who can do that. But as therapists as well, I always think if you are like grounded and you've made a sort of a conscious awareness before the session starts, just to slow things down, then your client is actually connecting with that energy at the same time. So it's like a mini version of sitting with a master, but not quite so grandiose. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting what you said there.
That's why I think in transpersonal psychosynthesis is one of those. In transpersonal psychotherapies, Assagioli was a promoter of having your own spiritual practice, because your level of being will have a deep impact regardless of the tools, the techniques, or the kind of the knowledge you have will have a big impact on the client. So that's I think that's relevant. Of course, knowledge also, using your rational mind and empathy also will have an impact. So the capacity of the therapist to be empathic will in itself regulate the dynamic with the client. But this, having a spiritual path practice, I find fundamental. In fact, I teach principle and practice of meditation. And I hope that the students come out of the teaching understanding that it's much more relevant for them as practitioners to do meditation than doing it to their clients. Of course, it's very important to help clients to do meditation, but how you are meditating, how much you're meditating is more relevant.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, I agree.
I saw you rolling eyes, James, because for some reason, so we know what's good for us, but we don't do it.
Well, it's tough, isn't it? It's demanding, and it's not taught on. It's not very much emphasized when you're training. That, you obviously the work you do with others with another therapist is important as well, because obviously they're challenging you. But that silence work, that inner a connection type work that happens with meditation, that's demanding, and it requires a lot of discipline. And I think that's a challenge for therapists, as it is for everybody, to try and get that connection that they want to have, that grounds them and helps them listen to something higher.
Yeah, you see, for the image that comes to my mind, it's much more difficult to push someone upward if you want to help them to reach a particular state. Much easier to pull them up. So you have to be yourself at that level where at least you want your client to get. Otherwise, it's very effortful.
Yeah,
And
indeed.
maybe drastic. If the client collapses on you, that's not good.
That's very,
Yeah.
very true. I was just going to ask another question, which is, what was your story behind you getting into breath work? Because we're starting to touch on this with meditation, but there's probably a backstory here that's quite interesting, and the passion for it I can sense as well. So we'd like to know a bit more about that.
The story is actually quite a funny story, I find. As you were saying, Lara, I've been interested in a particular type of breath work, which is pranayama, that is as part of yoga practice since I was in my 20s. I also wanted to kind of clarify, I'm not a yoga teacher. I started a yoga teacher training in my 20s, but I never finished it. But I studied
The
yoga.
philosophy, yeah.
But I've practiced since I was in my 20s. So my interest in pranayama started since then. But the realization of how potent it could be in therapy was the result of a really strange succession of events. When I was studying at SOAS, I became quite close friends with a Jain nun who was very well versed in Sanskrit. She was an amazing woman, Pratibha. And often I went to her community center and she was helping me with Sanskrit and meditation, and we developed, a good relationship. And then, we took different roads. She went back to India, and I don't know if you know, Jain nuns, they definitely don't have a lot of technology. So she was somewhere in Rajasthan, unreachable. So we lost touch for 10 years. And then I dreamt about her. In this, I was already a therapist. I was going on with my studies. I had already been in India, but, I dreamt about her. And so I went back in touch with SOAS and our Sanskrit teacher, who told me, incredible, Pratibha came back a week ago to London after years of being in Rajasthan. And so I got back in touch with her, and she was very lovely on the phone. Nice to hear from you. Come and visit. After 5 minutes of speaking with Pratibha, it was very clear that she had no idea who I was. She didn't have any recollection. And so I thought, okay, that's, pity, time and distance has, kind of dissolved this connection. And after a few weeks, I received an incredibly flowery, weird email from a Jain spiritual foundation in Rajasthan inviting me, honorable, omniscient Claudia, please come and share with us your amazing knowledge. And thank you for sharing your article. I thought, Jain Foundation's a mistake. It's obviously for my Jain friend, for some reason, emails, who knows. So I called her and she said, no, the email is for you. You're coming to this conference in 3 weeks. I said, no, I'm not, because I don't know what I'm talking about. I've never written an article in my life. So no. And she said, oh, you're so narrow-minded. Come here and let's do it together. Use my book. So, long story short, I wrote a dreadful article, I have to say, in a very short time. But in that article, because I chose breathwork with Pratibha's support, we just brainstormed. And I quickly realized, by reading a few scientific articles about the nervous system and breathing, of its incredible impact. So since then, it has become a real passion, because it is free, it's available to all. There is no space, no even physical condition that would prevent someone from doing breathing exercises. So even people that are really unwell potentially can do it. No side effects. So there are no drugs involved. In a lot of countries, healthcare centers are not available. So it's very democratic. I mean, it's amazing tools, apart from having a strong connection with spirituality. So it, connects the body, the emotions, psychology, and spirit all together. So, the more I studied, the more mesmerized. Recently, I have to deepen this topic because it's so incredibly fascinating. There are some new articles, because it was discovered the connection between breath and volition. apparently individuals act in volition, so consciously, very much more often. I think it was 78% more often during in-breath. But also there is a strong connection between breath and the kind of harmonization of the brain waves and the harmonization of the heart, the heart rate variabilities. So it's very powerful. It's a very powerful tool.
It is, and underused. We went on a holiday to Indonesia a couple of years ago, and we stayed in an ashram. And then one of the evenings we had kirtan, which is the singing mantra meditation. And then my husband is a child psychiatrist, as you know, and he started talking to someone who was responsible to the children who were participating on the kirtan. So the kirtan was organized by school. They came to the ashram to sing, and Jonathan sat we sat in different tables, and he was talking to the person who was responsible for the emotional and mental health of the children, the pastoral, or I don't know how they call it, in the school. And he said to her, "Wow, what do you do? How do you work? What kind of mental health issues you deal with the kids?" And this lady said to him, "We just work with the breath. We only do breath work with the kids, and we invite the parents to do breath work as well." And it's amazing, just breath work. And it was an aha moment for us at the time.
So you see how empowering, because the agency now is completely on the individual. So there's a lot of things that the engagement with, therefore, the will. They're talking about psychosynthesis. There is a very lovely story. I remember it's in the Chandogya Upanishad, but I might get it wrong for any kind of yoga expert. But there's a lovely story where the five senses and the mind, because the manas mind in one of the minds. Manas in yoga is one of the senses, is the sixth sense, is the coordinator. But anyhow, they went into a big argument of who should be the master of all. And breath was around, so decided to participate. And, they argued, the sight thought, without me, you're just going to, just fall into some, dreadful situation, a dreadful abyss. And obviously the hearing was, without me, you can't hear anybody talking, and so on. And Mana's mind was saying, without me, you can't coordinate, you will be lost. And they decided to go to the Lord and ask for their support. And so the Lord responded, just do it in the scientific way. Just do an experiment. Each one of you live for a year, and when you come back, see what happens to the other five. So there are 6 or 7 of you, actually there are 7. So the 5 senses, the manas and the breath. So see what happens. And the one that is most essential will be your master. So you understand where it's going. The sight left for a year, and of course they were a bit bruised out of going against obstacles, but they survived. Same with the taste, the hearing, and so on. But as soon as breath left, after a few seconds, they were dying. So that clearly indicated who was the master. And there's a beautiful sentence in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika that says that the mind is the master of the senses, but the breath is the master of the mind. So there are many quotes, in Indian, the Upanishad and the Vedas. There are many quotes about prana, which is not necessarily only the breath. Prana is what gives life to the lifeless, so the life force. So it's a bigger understanding of this element. It's not just the breath that we take, but the breath is the main aspect of prana from a physical point of view. But in many spiritual traditions, it's very clear that the breath has a deep connection with what in Christianity we can call God or Brahman, or whatever other word one wants to use. In the Bible, the breath is breathed in the human from God in the nostrils. That gives life, and also is the connection with God, because it's His breath. So we have this divine element into us There are lots of these stories of different type of names of gods. It doesn't matter, even in Greek mythology, of the god giving life and giving part of themselves to the human through breath.
It's really lovely, that story from the Upanishads that you were quoting. I just wonder whether do you think psychosynthesis as a practice actually uses these sorts of tools, breathwork tools, enough, or is this something that you want to see more of?
Well, Assagioli was quite interested in Raja Yoga, so he knew about the relevance of pranayama. I don't think it is used enough, for sure. I mean, breathwork is becoming, from when I started to now, there is an explosion, just like mindfulness, an explosion of articles. But it's definitely not used sufficiently. I think there needs a bit more training. I mean, there is something, quite basic in a therapist's capacity to use breathwork. In yoga, in Chinese medicine, in Ayurveda, I think in most communities around the world, there is a sophistication in understanding the breath. So in fact, in pranayama, there are hundreds of different types of pranayama, of exercise. And this is because through introspection, there is in yoga, people that are very well versed in the art of pranayama understand that there is a subtle capacity to interact with very different aspects of the body, also different subtler bodies, not just the physical bodies, but different levels of energetic bodies. So there is a really capillary understanding of different elements, different length and retentions and many things, mudras, constrictions of various different aspects of the body. So it's very sophisticated, but there is also that we don't need to learn that necessarily. This is years of study. But there is a very basic understanding of almost a binary. I mean, obviously, this is an oversimplification, that in-breath and out-breath are connected with the sympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, which in itself is connected to fight, flight, freeze, and feigning death. So just that, the simplicity of learning which part of breath work. In-breath, for example, is more connected with the sympathetic nervous system. Breathing out is more connected with the parasympathetic nervous system. This is just really basic. Breathing with your diaphragm, using the diaphragm, connects more with the parasympathetic nervous system and releases some neurotransmitters and hormones that helps calm and relax. They're using the diaphragm. Nasal breathing is more useful mostly for relaxation and for, in general, well-being than mouth breathing. Some vigorous mouth breathing, or what now Wim Hof is, if you know this Dutch.
Wim Hof, yeah.
Some more dramatic breath work can be interesting and useful in some situations, not others.
Like Grof, are you thinking of? Stanislav Grof?
Yeah, Stanislav, of course, holotropic breath work. So for some situations, this can be very interesting tools. This very effortful type of breath work, I would not recommend unless you have kind of actually studied. Also with some people, really not recommended. Hypertension, problem with heart, pregnant women, not recommended. People with severe complex trauma, not recommended unless the trainer has an understanding of what might happen. So, but generally, otherwise, milder versions of breath work can be incredibly powerful.
And you can bring that to, and you can bring that to your therapy session as well.
Well, completely. Yeah. Firstly, as I was saying with meditation, I use it.
Because walk the talk.
Exactly. I ideally want to come to a therapy session regulated, but also able to re-regulate in the session. So I use breathwork a lot in session and before session, and so my practice. But then, of course, it's a tool. I want my wish is my client at some point become independent. They don't need me or anybody else somehow any longer, or any other substance. So I definitely use it. I do a lot of psychoeducation, breath education. with my clients, and when I can, and when it's useful, because any tools can be an obstacle to the relationship. So it's not just use it all the time. But with some clients, so often within the client work with a client, I offer breath work. Definitely very fundamental tool. I'm saying that it's a tool in therapy. So like any tool, it can be misused. And I'm thinking of the wonderful example that Piero Ferrucci gives in his The Power of Kindness, where I don't know if you've read the book, but anyhow, at some point he describes a psychiatrist that is working with an autistic individual for many years, severely autistic, so nonverbal. And of course, the communication is quite difficult, but there is a lot of empathy, compassion, and a relationship is built after many years. And at some point, the psychiatrist has an intuition, takes a pencil and throws it the other side of the room and asks the patient, could you please get it for me? And incredibly, the patient understands, goes and gets the pen and brings it back, which was quite a breakthrough in the therapy. And so in a conference, this psychiatrist recounts this event and says something has happened. And after that, there is a number of psychiatrists that throw pens at the autistic clients, right? So that is a badly used tools. So many tools, it's contextualize. I wouldn't sit with a client and the first thing I tell them, you just do breath work. Yeah. So it's
so you're guided by your, sorry.
It's within a relationship.
Yeah. You're guided by your intuition, and there is a lot of research now showing that the meditation and breath work really develop people's ability to be in touch with their feelings, which is the major, I think, obstacle sometimes in therapy, because we are so in our heads. We are. I've been talking about my own experience when I first came to therapy. I was asked how I was feeling, and I would always give a very practical answer, and be in the relationship of how you're feeling and how what's going on for you. And we know now that breath work and meditation facilitate that. So it's like the soil is more prepared for meditation. Also, what you said at the beginning about therapy, is not the only way, but in combination, which it was with Assagioli, was advocating that we use our own spiritual practice and our own tools for well-being to connect with the self. And
I mean, the connection between breath and emotions is very well known. No? I mean, if you're sad, you cry.
If you're tense, you hold your breath.
Yeah, if you're happy, you laugh. There's a particular type of breath. If you yawn, you're relaxed. You breathe in a different way. The connection with some fundamental aspect of life and breath. Pregnant women, when they give birth, the breathing changes dramatically. So there's everywhere. There's a lot in literature. There is a moment in the Odyssey when Ulysses goes back and Homer describes the different breathing of Penelope when she realizes that this is Ulysses coming back, and everywhere there is a connection. Also in I think it's the Ramayana, where there is the monkey god that uses breath to become huge, like a mountain, in order to be able to cross very long distances. That also gives a suggestion that breath work can enhance some of our capacities, which is definitely true. But I was saying that since we know that there is a connection, automatic connection between breath and emotions, then it is also true that we can do the top-down version, to have a conscious use of breath to then instigate some emotions.
Okay.
That is the whole point.
You can breathe in a way that will make you happy.
Yeah, there are a lot of graphs. There's a lot of research that shows that fear has a particular breathing pattern, joy has a particular breathing pattern, meditation has a different breathing pattern, anger has a different. So, since there is an automatic correlation, equally you can use particular breathing pattern to instigate a different state of mind. And this is like, there's a book on meditation that is called Altered Traits, but like breathe with meditation. So equally with breathing, there is a difference between altered states that you can achieve with a client, meaning a client comes with a anxious state. You had them to breathe using the diaphragm, and after a few minutes, you have instigated the parasympathetic nervous system, and therefore they reach a state of calmness. Then they go out of therapy, and something happens, and they go back to anxiety. So also, you might recommend a practice of breathing, so that it's not just a state change, but a trait change. You want the individual to shift in their life, not just in sessions with you. So this is a more ongoing practice that you might suggest the clients, so not just with you.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was thinking also about the breath in the East, and what we've done with yoga in the West is, unfortunately, a lot has been changing. The focus with the yoga in the body, in the physical exercise of it. And that particularly was a trap for me when I started training as to be a yoga teacher. I was comparing myself of being strong and being super flexible, but what I really developed with that practice was the relationship with my body through the breath and the physical movement. And now I teach yoga to elderly, chair yoga, and so it's very different, and I always focus a lot on the breath. And it took 10 years for me to find my own language and get away from the yoga, in the way we practice in London, which served me, but the focus on the breath was lesser depending on where you're practicing. So yeah, that speaks to me quite a lot. It's just like an encouragement to say like, well, yeah. And that's what I say to my yoga students. The most important, you can do those movements in any physical class, but the difference of the yoga is with the breath, allowing the breath to carry you, and that's the gift, really. And also it connects with your first answer about therapy. You're doing therapy once a week is great, it helps, but doing with I actually want to say that through you, actually, Claudia, I got into psychosynthesis because I didn't know about psychosynthesis, and the little disclosure is the fact that you were the therapist of someone who very close to me, and really for me it was a gift seeing how therapy works and how it affects and influence and support you. Obviously, the client wants to be willing, the will has to be there, but when the will was there, and this person very close to me was in therapy with you, and I saw the changes, I saw the growth, and I saw that the actually therapy working. It was incredible, and it had a massive impact in my own life. So I want to thank you for that as well.
Thank you, Lara. This is such a wonderful feedback. As you know, in our work, sometimes clients leave and you never know what happens to them. Sometimes I have some clients in my mind and I'm thinking, I just wonder what happened to him or what happened to her. I wonder if they're fine. So thank you. Thank you for the self-disclosure. It makes me smile. I'm very happy to hear. I maybe want to expand a bit on pranayama, because pranayama is part, as you were saying, like most breathing practices, are part of a much broader spiritual practice. So I'm talking about pranayama just because I know it more, and can't speak about this, but there's Chinese, there is the African, there is lots of Japanese, but it's within a different goal. Most spiritual traditions have as their goal a reconnecting with what in psychosynthesis the higher self. In yoga, pranayama is one of the 8 limbs. Ashtanga, which we have taken, and now it just means physical exercise, but in Sanskrit, Ashtanga means 8 limbs. And one of the 8 limbs is the physical exercise, and another one is pranayama, and then there is pratyahara, various type of meditations. But I'm saying that because in therapy, I don't at all imagine myself as offering a spiritual path. That's a different thing. Like as Sajoli said, psychosynthesis takes us to the door of spirituality, and then you have to do your own work with a spiritual teacher. So just like mindfulness, I am taking an aspect of a much broader, I would say also, I would say more meaningful, not because therapy it is meaningful, but, spiritual path, personally, I find it more meaningful. But I'm taking an aspect of a spiritual path, which is yoga, and I'm using it to decrease or to support individuals to decrease suffering. But that is not a replacement for a spiritual path. I think with humility, because I've also resisted the idea of taking something, removing it from a wider context, where there is a spiritual teachers, where there is also in yoga, there is yama and yama. So there are ethical practices. So there is a much wider context to remove an aspect and then use it. But actually, since it decreases suffering, decreases anxiety, can help decrease depression, can help with ADHD, can help with all sorts of issues. I feel it's okay to use it.
I was just going to add, I don't know how much time we've got left on this topic, but it's so interesting. Just as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about how I have an interest in Kriya Yoga, but also in the context of the Buddha's eightfold noble path. And the first step is like perfect vision. And with the breath, and then the second part is perfect emotion, or accessing your will. And I find both of those things apply very well to what you're trying to help somebody do in therapy. And then linking it back to the breath work, I think that's what you help a client connect into, without trying to be some spiritual master for them, but you can help them by slowing down to start to see themselves clearly, to start to get closer to perfect vision of themselves. That's an aspiration, of course. They don't ever one doesn't attain perfect vision, but that's what the Buddha is saying is an aspiration. So you can get that sort of sense of clarity, and then you can start to access the will inside you to actually take actions and behaviors that are in alignment with that perfect vision. And I think the breath work is the engine, or one of the mechanisms that helps you do that. I don't know if you agree with that, or that was just my take on what we're discussing.
Thank you, Jamie. I think, broadly speaking, what you're doing with breath is what Assagioli, one of Assagioli's fundamental tenet is, that you try to expand the middle unconscious. So you try to include or to let emerge aspects of us that are not as conscious. And with the conscious use of breath, that is fundamentally what one is doing. You're trying to step out of automatic unconscious behaviors, reactive behaviors, and instead make your actions more connected with the will and with your conscious self. Mm-hmm. So definitely, there is a very strong connection. The breath and conscious use of breath is deeply connected with the will, which is the main kind of tool that the self uses in relation to the world. It's like, I think the metaphor is the sun ray to the sun. Mm. There are some books, some texts. I'm thinking of some text in the Shaiva tantric tradition where the breath is compared to Shiva, or to the Lord. It's main, as I was saying originally, it's the main tool that the divine uses to act in the world. And that takes me back to what I was saying. That's why it's so fascinating that there is research that shows that the breath is deeply connected with intentional actions. It's incredibly fascinating.
It is.
Yeah, I just took took a deep breath here, and I realized that when we are to use our will, we tend to do that. Take a deep breath, really.
Yeah.
I was also thinking, one of the things sometimes I find it is a barrier for people to access such a simple, free, or for example, maybe attending a workshop about breath work, or that we call, for example, pranayama, is the spiritual, the religious feeling attached to it. And I find it, what I'm trying to say is, I teach now, one of the groups I teach is it's for Catholic nuns. And that was really interesting how it happened. I presented what I was doing without any religion or any Sanskrit even attached, because I wanted it to be, anyway, it was all synchronicities that made it happen. And I've been teaching 5 nuns for a year now. And so I don't use Sanskrit, and I don't use the regular yoga language, but I adapted it to Christianity. No, not to Christianity, to no faith, And then one of the nuns told me recently that they know about a community that has been doing yoga, but they called some Peter's thing, I don't know. They put a Catholic name on but I wanted it to be available to everyone, independent of their faith. It's just breath. We all have to breathe. It's because the teachings are a lot come from the Eastern philosophies. It doesn't mean it's attached to a religion, and it can be helpful for everyone. So just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
I think using different names to meet where the client is, and breathwork is known throughout the globe in different ways. Not just, it has been categorized and systematized much more in the East, often because other cultures were oral cultures, but it's very present in the African cultures, in the South American cultures, for sure. In Russia also, there's known breathwork. I think that for some reason in Europe, much less so. Although there is some evidence that in some monasteries they do use breathwork and some form of what you are calling yoga practices, as these exercises. I think it's well known, the connection mind, body, spirit. So for sure, I think this is a good practice to shift language.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to have a connotation.
I was very lucky. My nuns were super open-minded to try, and there was an element of trust, so I keep it into the boundaries, but it's very rewarding, and they overlap for me. I use my psychosynthesis learning into my yoga practice and my yoga and breath as well. Yeah, and it's been really inspiring hearing from you. Although we know when we breathe, and if we've been practicing for a while, we know what the breath does to us. But it's we also wanted to. We are reassured by the research, and now it's proven that it's also effective.
Yeah, well, neuroscience and science is really scratching the surface. As I was saying, we understand very basic understanding of breathwork. But since everything we're discovering matches what the old text was saying, we can infer that quite possibly everything else that the old texts are saying is possibly also correct. That's why a lot of exercises, breathwork exercises, might not have a kind of a complete understanding from a scientific perspective, because a lot of it is much subtler than just a biomechanic work of the individual. One of is the tumor breathing. And as you know, some of the breathwork now, holotropic breathwork in particular, has a capacity to cause altered states. And some of those, for some people, are incredibly deep. There is a connection with the transpersonal. Some people have felt that they retrace the steps to birth. Not just in terms of normal connection with people, of normal functioning life, but the breath has also the capacity to put us at above thinking state, a trans-personal state.
Yeah, I was just thinking how you said it's subtler than just a biomechanical process, and how actually, certainly in my belief, when you're breathing, you're trying to access the chakras, which of course then are opening through to other energy levels anyway, and other parts of you. Too big for this conversation today, but certainly I think there's a lot more going on.
Yeah.
Than
In
just
most other traditions, there's a subtlety. As I was saying, in Indian philosophy, there is more than one mind. They understood that you cannot describe everything with one mind. There is the intuitive mind, there is the mind connected with the ego, there is the mind connected with senses, there is the mind connected with the past, present, and future, there is the mind connected with the higher self. So there's not one mind. Equally, there is not just one body. There are several bodies. There is the more material body, there is the body connected with the breath, there is the body connected with emotions, and so on. There are many centers of energy in the body. There is not just one breath. There are 5 different types of breaths that connect with different functions of the body. So I'm talking about prana as a general word, but actually in yoga, in the yoga system and in Ayurveda, there are 5 different types of breaths. Each of them have also other ramifications. So there are lots of types of breath. One's connected with the kidneys, one's connected with the digestion, one connected with the mind, one connected with emotions, one connected with will. So it's incredibly subtle. So we're using the surface to support individual with mental health, but then there is a cascade of knowledge that goes in the subtler aspect of the mind and emotions and spirituality.
That's great stuff. I'm aware of the time, Claudia, and I wanted to ask you what you're offering now these days, and where can people find you? I know you do the workshop on breathwork at the Trust. So if you wanted to share how can people connect with you?
I'm doing a day of workshop. I've also accepted to do one for a charity in May, I think, and I've done one in Italy. So I might repeat the workshop in Italy next year. But I'm doing in the Psychosynthesis Education Trust once every 6 months. I might extend it to 2 days. At some point, I will include, because currently my workshop is divided into the therapeutic aspect and the spiritual aspect of breath, giving much more space to the therapeutic aspect and just a general outlook of the spiritual aspect. As you were saying in yoga, final aim of yoga in Sanskrit, it's the general translation is the cessation of the waves of the mind. So that is the general aim, and breathing is part of it. It's part of that bigger aim. So I'm giving a general, sorry.
I was just going to ask, is that in person, this particular?
It's in person. Yeah. In person. I'm thinking about doing it online. I'm not sure yet, because I prefer to see how people breathe. It's easier. Often I do work with breathwork with clients online, but I have to rely a lot on the feedback of the client, how you're breathing, because I can't see what's happening in most of the body. And at some point, I will put together psychedelics and breathwork, since I'm starting a kind of a long training in psychedelics, just because I want to understand what the difference is in neurophysiology caused by these 2 modalities, since both are becoming quite mainstream. As you know, there is a lot of studies with psychedelics. Not so much, unfortunately, with breathwork. So, but yes, currently is in the Psychosynthesis Trust. As I said, I'm doing something, but I don't remember where, in May for a charity somewhere in England. I've forgotten where.
But you can share the links with us, and we can put on the description of this video. And also, if you want to share if you have a website or any way that people can contact you for personal therapy as well, one-to-one therapy.
Yes, I don't have a website.
Okay.
Are you on LinkedIn?
Well,
how
can people find you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can be found. LinkedIn is the best way to connect with me.
Mhm.
I think Jamie has a final
I
question
don't.
for you.
Well, there's actually I have so much, but we've sort of rushed.
Yeah, we wanted to talk about addiction as well. So maybe, hopefully you come back.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
Yeah,
say. Whether we can get you
yeah,
back again, because I found it so interesting, and I feel like we've done justice to this topic, which is great. But we've
yeah,
also left other topics on the
yeah,
table that we were also interested in. So yeah, maybe one day we can get you back and
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very powerful tool in addiction, breathwork, for sure.
yeah,
So, absolutely.
yeah.
A very good book, if I can finish with maybe a suggestion that is very comprehensive, very simple. Maybe the downside is doesn't give a lot of references to what it says, but it gives a good idea of the power of breath, the power of nasal breathing. We didn't speak about that and the connection between various aspects of the body and breath. But anyhow, it's called The Breath. It's by James Nestor. It's a very kind of broad and simple, and it's also very autobiographical. So it's an easy read, but it gives good information about breath. So if I can suggest a book,
Thank you.
it's the subtitle is the New Science of a Lost Art.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. That was a very nice chat, I would say.
Yes, thank you so much. That was great. It was really fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you for all you've been doing, for so much you bringing, and the contribution you're giving to the world and to well-being, and both in psychosynthesis and generally in the spiritual realm. So we're very grateful and honored to have you.